Today is Friday, April 3rd, 2026, and today is National Chocolate Mousse Day, which sounds like something that shouldn't exist in its current form. Chocolate is solid, air is not, and somehow someone figured out how to combine the two into something that feels both rich and light at the same time. Welcome to This Day in History from Wait, That's Random. I'm your host, C.L. Burns. Today in 1860, the Pony Express began operations, creating one of the fastest mail delivery systems the United States had ever seen. At the time, communications across the country were slow and uncertain. Sending a letter from Missouri to California could take weeks, sometimes longer depending on weather, terrain, or disruptions along the route. The Pony Express changed that. The system worked as a relay network. Riders would carry mail in a leather pouch called a mochila and ride hard for about 10 to 15 miles before reaching a station. There, a fresh horse and sometimes a new rider would take over immediately. This process repeated over and over across nearly 2,000 miles of territory. No single rider made the full journey. Instead, the speed came from consistent movement. Fresh horses, minimal stops, no delays. Under good conditions, a letter could travel from Missouri to California in about 10 days, which was remarkable for the time. But what's interesting is what it must have felt like to be part of it. Riders were often young, sometimes teenagers, traveling alone across long stretches of open land. No towns for miles, no backup if something went wrong. Just you, a horse, and the understanding that someone on the other end was waiting for that message. And in a way, that's what the Pony Express really represents. Not just speed, but urgency. The need to stay connected, even when the distance made it difficult. And sometimes the stories that travel across those distances aren't just messages. Sometimes they become legends. And not all of them end the way people expect. On April 3rd, 1882, the outlaw Jesse James was killed in his own home in Missouri. By that point, Jesse James had become one of the most famous figures in the American West. He had spent years robbing banks, trains, and stagecoaches, often evading capture and building a reputation that was part criminal, part folk hero. But his story didn't end in a dramatic shootout. It ended quietly. Jesse James was at home, standing on a chair to adjust a picture on the wall. He had set his guns aside, and that's when Robert Ford, a member of his own gang, shot him from behind. The mechanism here isn't complicated. It wasn't a duel. It wasn't a chase. It was betrayal. Ford had been working with authorities and was hoping to collect a reward and gain recognition for killing one of the most wanted men in the country. But that's where the story takes an interesting turn. Instead of being celebrated, Robert Ford was widely seen as a coward. Because in stories, especially stories about outlaws, people expect a certain kind of ending, a final showdown, a fair fight. And when reality doesn't match the story people have built in their minds, it feels off. It's a reminder that history doesn't always follow narrative rules. Sometimes it's quieter, and sometimes it's messier. And over time, those kinds of stories about people, reputation, and identity start to shape something else. Not just history, but how we tell stories about ourselves. Which brings us to 2010. Apple released the first iPad, introducing a new kind of device that sat somewhere between a smartphone and a laptop. At first, the reaction was mixed. Some people looked at it and thought it was just a larger phone. Others weren't sure what problem it was solving. But the idea behind it was more subtle. The iPad wasn't trying to replace computers. It was trying to simplify how people interacted with them. The mechanism behind it centered on a touchscreen interface. Instead of using a keyboard and mouse, users interacted directly with the screen, tapping, swiping, and pinching to control what they saw. This removed a layer of complexity. You didn't need to learn commands or navigate file systems in the same way. You could just interact. And that changed who could comfortably use a device. Children, older adults, people who might not have felt comfortable with traditional computers. it also changed how content was consumed. Reading, watching, browsing, everything became more immediate, more direct. And like a lot of new technologies, it didn't fully make sense at first. But over time, it found its place. And when you think about it, the way we tell stories, whether through letters, legends, or screens, often comes down to how real they feel at the moment. Which brings us to someone who built a career on making performances feel exactly that. Marlon Brando was born on April 3, 1924. He became one of the most influential actors in film history, known for his performances in movies like A Streetcar Named Desire and The Godfather. Brando helped popularize a style of acting known as method acting. Instead of delivering lines in a formal or theatrical way, method acting focused on making performances feel natural, drawing on real emotions and experiences to create a more believable character. The goal wasn't just to perform a role, it was to become it. And that shift changed acting. After Brando, audiences began to expect something different. Less performance, more realism. If you step back and look at these moments together, something interesting starts to take shape. A network of writers carries messages across vast distances. A legendary outlaw's story ends in a way that doesn't match the myth. And a new device changes how people interact with information and stories. Different moments, different technologies, but all of them, in one way or another, are about how people connect and how those connections shape the stories we tell. Anyway, those are a few things I ended up discovering while wandering through April 3rd. Stop by tomorrow and we'll see what the next date decides to reveal. If you want to know more about me or the work I do, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and I appreciate you stopping by.